Adam,
Wow. You're good.
so we're streaming through Google Hangouts right now, but that's our YouTube link. So like, that's our YouTube link. So you just tell people to go on there. We're streaming right now.
Okay.
So it should be.
Tell everybody hi. Yeah. Mute the
Our
speaker.
live stream is on Google Hangouts. Whoever goes on YouTube, you can keep it right now. Whoever goes on YouTube, they won't be able to talk anyway to us. If they're joining it on Google Hangouts, however, tell us to be joining. So post both links. The links are right here. The Google Hangouts link and the YouTube link. Post both links on the Facebook page. Tell them that they can watch through YouTube, or if they decide to join us on Google Hangouts, tell them
No,
that.
we shouldn't even give them the Google Hangout
How's it going?
You got it. Good.
Yeah, so we're that way, yeah.
You got it.
Okay, let's make an announcement. No, I feel fine. I just want everything. Yeah.
I totally thought that my stand was good though, you know. I'm just saying.
What molecule is this, Adam?
It's not a molecule, it's just yeah. Okay, where do we go?
No. Did you copy the link, right? Copy the YouTube
Command C?
Command C. Make a post on page.
What's it called? Yeah.
What's the name of it? Hashtag blessing in this. Okay. What? See what the actual like? That's the YouTube link. Yeah.
Are you tweeting it? Copy the link from the website.
I mean, that's the link, but yeah. Just copy
Is it? Because I feel like it's like condensed.
Yeah, it's like the copy.
What's the? There's an event page, right?
Oh, so, okay, so once you post it, go on the YouTube video and copy the link. You're being live streamed right now. Doing all things. Oh my god, look at you.
I look so intense. And it looks like I did all the work. I did all the work.
I just get pissed when there's something like I have to if I have to solve something, I'm like determined, like I have to do it.
I'll check it on my own laptop. I'll try to get it whatever I got. What does it look like? Can you do it?
And that's on the side.
Wait, what's this?
Let's bump it up one time.
What's this?
This is live stream.
Tell me how it looks if I step forward.
You getting live stream for what?
So people can see it. Chill, brother. Let me, does it look all right still? Or is it all up in the face?
So it's live right now.
Yeah. We good.
Should we just like a smaller table?
No.
Okay, so it's up and running. You're good.
How do you know how many people are watching?
That's a good question.
How do you know, like, we know it's up, right?
It says there's 4 viewers right now.
You said it's up, like.
Oh yeah, it's definitely.
Is that dangerous where it is right now?
It should be fine.
Are you watching yourself?
Yeah, screenshot it.
What are you guys using?
We're using Google Hangouts.
Okay. Hello, everybody. All right, welcome. I see some beautiful faces out here. Thank you all for coming. So, we have a sign-in sheet. So, can you all make sure to sign in on the sign-in sheet? It's right there next to the food. So, our options is basturma, which is like a thin meat slice, and it's a zabiha option. Yeah, it's halal. And then, there's falafel. Okay, and then we have a chicken option, which isn't zabiha. And then we have falafel, and then we have black beef, which is all vegetarian. Yeah, they're all labeled. But just so you know. Huh? Oh. Well, okay. Anyway, so for the people that aren't zabiha, please try to take the chicken, just so the people that are zabiha can have the basturma. But it's your choice at the end of the day. So yeah, you can go ahead and get in line to get food. Oh wait, it's like a make your own sandwich thing. So you'll figure it out as you go.
Are we still doing ladies first?
You don't do that anymore? Okay.
Oh, that was live.
Okay, I'm gonna move. I have a bunch of this is how my desk looks like.
What's up, man?
I'll keep it all.
Just kidding. Thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting. Yeah, there may be something like or yeah, okay. So you should get like one. So they get one. So everybody should have at least one handout and one posted and one green.
Got it.
I live I don't mind if I'm going to be off camera. That's a good sign. Kind of like birds. You're not supposed to do all this.
Adam, did you post the link?
I did. It's on the event page. It's on the Facebook.
Facebook?
And then Alia posted it on Twitter. Right? Twitter. I retweeted it one time. You won't know it's me though. I'm incognito on Twitter. I'm like invisible and hidden. Yeah. Yeah. That's why I like to say crazy things sometimes, you know. Keep it real with people. Nothing too bad. You know.
I'm good. I have water and coffee. I'm about to go. So hospitable, like, better than me. I'm like, you know what? Like, maybe I'm just like,
within Muslim communities and interfaith coalitions to address racial justice on campus. It will then include dialogue and discussion about action steps to support solidarity efforts on campus. Some questions we hope to address include: what is it like to be Black in MSA or Muslim in BSA? How can Muslim Student Associations support Black Muslim students on campus? How can Muslim students build coalitions to address systemic oppression that affect them and allied communities? So now just to talk about wonderful Margaret Aziza Hill. She is co-founder and programming director of Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative, Muslim Art, assistant editor at Alt Muslima, a blog, and columnist at Muslim Matters. She is on the Advisory Council on Islam, Social Justice, and Interreligious Engagement Program at the Union Theological Seminary, and the winner of MPAC's 2015 Community Changemaker Award. Okay, Allahu Akbar. She has nearly a decade of teaching experiences at all levels, from elementary, secondary, college level to adult education. She earned her master's in the history of the Middle East and Islamic Africa from Stanford University in 2006. All right, her research includes colonial surveillance in northern Nigeria, anti-colonial resistance among West Africans in Sudan during the early 20th century, and race in Muslim communities. She is also a freelance writer with articles published in Time, Sisters, Islamic Monthly, Al Jazeera English, Virtual Mosque, formerly SahibWeb.com, Spice Digest, and Huffington Post. She has given talks, lectures, and workshops in various universities and communities across the country. So, can we welcome her, please?
My other big achievements is that my sister, she is a graduate from UCLA, so she's a Bruin. So yeah, it's been it's definitely an honor to be here tonight. Normally, I've given a lot of talks within Masajid, within community centers, but doing work on campus with the student community, it really brings me full circle. Because I became Muslim when I was 18 years old in community college, so much of my development as a Muslim happened in campus life. So it happened in a community like yours. And I was in school for a long, long time. Anybody that reads some of my biography or writings out there, they know it took me about 10 years to finish my undergraduate. So that was a lot of years in undergrad. So 15 years of being involved with MSA. So if there's anybody that knows a lot about being Black in MSA, it would be somebody that spent 15 years in both undergrad and graduate school. Okay. So I just wanted to kind of begin with a few reminders, and then I'll do a little bit of I guess housekeeping. So, well, the first part is that this is not just a talk. I'm not here to talk down to any one of you. We believe that many of the answers and the solutions to issues come from the participants. Muslim Art's work is really to spark important conversations. We learn more from our participants than we actually teach. So this is really geared to be an introduction into the work that Muslim Art does by having you experience it. So this is, I would say, kind of like basic level 1. We have lots and lots of workshops, but this, it's very compact. So I'm going to give a basic introduction to the talk. And if you notice, you have this handout with 2 Post-its. And so the Post-it notes you see up here in the front, I'm going to have you actually think right now, just take a moment. So this is part of the housekeeping. Think for a moment about where have you seen racism in your community? However you want to define community, whether that's your local community, campus community, masjid community. So I want you on the pink paper, if you have a pen or pencil, I'm an educator, so by training, and this is kind of I was a TA for a long time too, so I'm like that TA. Yeah, so if anybody doesn't have a pencil, so I know like some people may have not, you may have came from like the dorms or like, yeah, I came to get some food. You weren't expecting to do some work, but I'm actually putting you to work tonight. It's kind of a shortcut, right? So I want you to think about, where have you seen racism in your community? This could be personal, it could be something that you observed somebody do, it could be something that your family's done, your family has experienced, but really we have a lot of different experiences. If you don't have a sheet here, we have the Post-it notes. Now the hint is, I'm asking you to do this before I give you any other hints and provide any other examples, so that maybe you can connect your own experiences as we kind of form these kind of clouds, like word clouds here of our shared experiences. So just take another moment. So you have like about, 2 minutes. If you haven't written, oh, you don't have one?
I have a question.
You're going to eventually put these on here. So once you are done, there's a lot of movement here. You can hold on to them until and then I'll ask you to put these on the wall once you're done. It'll be like, yeah, so we are going to have Aliyah. She's going to, I'm butchering it. How do you prefer your name? Aliyah. So I'm going to have Aliyah. She's going to collect your pink sheets, and we're going to put them in the word cloud here. So on the pink, you're going to write your experience, your observation, or where have you seen racism?
Oh, shotgun too.
Yeah. I love them. Okay. Okay, so if you're done, somebody's going to come and collect them, and we're going to put them up in the word cloud as I refer back to them. Okay. So has everybody written down their thoughts? So I want you to hold on to your thoughts of where you have seen racism. Because basically, when we connect with this topic, is that all of us have been affected by racism. Now, it's important for us to first understand that racism, how we understand it as a term, is tied to power. So, a lot of people will talk about reverse racism, or they'll say everybody's racist. Well, we're not going to use that definition, because really when we think about interpersonal, racism is prejudice plus power. It's the ability to treat somebody as less or discriminate against somebody in a particular way that's attached to a system of power. And so that'll be one of our very clear distinctions. Now, this doesn't mean that racial prejudice does not affect people, and it's very hurtful. So for instance, if there's a hate crime against somebody, a white American who's targeted, that could actually be deadly. But what we're talking about today is looking at systemic oppression. And so we're going to connect systemic oppression of Muslims in this country to the systemic oppression of people of color in this country. So we're going to really looking through the lens of Black and MSA to talk about how to make these connections. So it's a lot, we're dealing with a lot here. And the topic of tonight's workshop, we changed topics a couple of times, but really based on the lens of looking at Black and MSA, because really for many Black students on campus, they're dealing with multiple oppressions, multiple ways that they may experience discrimination. So, for example, like many people, when they first think about Muslim, what do they imagine? Where does somebody that's Muslim come from? Do they imagine
Islamophobia, desert,
Islamistan, even some made-up place, Agrabah or something. We're gonna like we bomb Agrabah. So even with that, it's like sometimes the silencing of certain issues. So for instance, during there's chaplains will actually reach out to Muslim students, say if there's something that happens in Pakistan, they'll reach out to the Muslim students, be like, you know, is your family affected? But they may not do the same thing. Did that happen last year in Kenya? You know, like did the chaplains reach out and say like, are you guys okay? So, you know, sometimes like issues that may affect Black Muslim students with Black Lives Matter, where that trauma of actually seeing the spectacle of Black death may actually have such a huge detrimental effect on Black Muslim students. Also, no one's reaching out to them for like their spiritual well-being or to see how they're coping with certain issues. So those are kind of like, that's just one example of where Black Muslim students may feel like, okay, like some of our issues aren't centered. Within the masajid, what typical countries do you hear like dua that you'll hear from the imams?
Pray for the brothers and sisters in Palestine, and pray for the brothers and sisters
and then everyone in the Ummah throughout the world. What is that? Like they usually say like in everywhere else in the world. So like it becomes this place everywhere throughout the world. But when we think about the demographics of Muslims, about 18% of Muslims in the world are Arab, 15% are sub-Saharan African. So that's not even accounting for the Black identities in North Africa. But like the majority of Muslims are Asian, with the largest populations in Indonesia. But like even how we imagine Muslim issues are usually centered around the Middle East. And in fact, most Muslims actually have to account for whatever political issues are in the Middle East and, you know, kind of defend them or explain certain cultural practices, even if those aren't part of their culture. So for instance, they were like saying something about World Hijab Day, and they mentioned acid burnings. And I'm just like, okay, like that's very terrible, it's misogynistic, but you know, why is that a Muslim issue if this happens within non-Muslim South Asian cultures? But it's the kind of centering certain perspectives as Muslim issues when in fact those are just kind of maybe manifestations of patriarchal violence against women in a particular culture. Now, just to kind of highlight, I don't want to sound like, okay, we're just being divisive by just complaining, you know, like sometimes people are just like, you know, Black Muslims are always complaining when they're not seen. But the erasure of Black Muslims, and sometimes media does it on purpose, like where they will actually look for a particular voice with a particular type of story to have a particular narrative that erases Black Muslims. And when we mean Black, we're talking about the diversity of Black identities. And so we have, with Black identities, you have African American, who are descendants of slaves in America. You have Afro-Caribbean. You have Africans from the continent. We have East Africans, West Africans, South Africans also. I mean, I was like very pleasantly surprised to learn of like people who actually came from the East African diaspora. They were South Asian, but they were like so East African, like from Kenya, Tanzania. And so, you know, you have the diversity of experience of being African and Black. And so, and there's also Afro-Latinos, and that's something some of like my most influential people are Muslims are Afro-Latino Muslims. And so this diversity of experiences is often kind of ignored. And just like the diversity of Muslim Americans is often overlooked when somebody says the image of Muslims. And now since 9/11, people kind of just like mix up this whole brown thing. It's like Arab, South Asian is someplace in the Middle East. Meanwhile, there's this erasure of African Muslims and their narratives. And obviously the African Americans who make up a significant, one of the largest groups of Muslims in America. So to like, when we break down Muslim Americans are about 20, Black Muslims make up about 28% of the population. We can add a little bit more, some statistics show about 33%, making it the largest group. South Asians kind of like up there too, we're about even with the South Asians. And then Arab Americans about 23%, but we also have other diverse groups, people from Turkey, we have a lot of mixed race, we have about 4 to 6% Latino Muslims, and in California, that's like definitely growing, and it's like, it's a very exciting thing as we see both, and just because like, you know, just we see, you know, you have some sister prior, but you know, and just because when some people, they may actually be from like their own heritage, maybe from like the New World or from the Americas, there are many people who actually are second, third generation Muslim Americans. And so there's the other way where some people look at upon African American and Afro-Latino Muslims as if they're just only converts and they don't know anything. And you'd have like people like, can you say your Shahada? Are you really, really Muslim? Are you really, really saying your Shahada? So, you know, this happens a lot with African American Muslims, or just the assumption that people don't know. Now, we don't have as much representation of like Indonesian, Southeast Asian Muslims, but you know, we do have communities here in Southern California, Filipino American Muslims, Indonesian and Malaysian. There's a Thai masjid. So it's we have an amazing mixture going on here. And because of the diversity that we have as a community, like the American Muslim community is in many ways a microcosm, and it's a great opportunity for us to embody those Islamic principles that we see in the Quran, of like our famous verse, 30:22, and of his signs is the creation of the heavens and earth, and the diversity of the languages and your colors. Did you hear that? Your colors. Okay. So indeed, in that are signs for those of knowledge. Now, this means that Islam recognizes our colors, that we should celebrate our languages and our colors and our backgrounds, and that we should see it and not render it invisible. But sometimes, you know, we get people saying like, oh, there is no division in Islam, or people, when you talk about culture, there's no culture in Islam. So then you get this kind of ahistorical narrative, which ends up pushing like a hegemonic view about Islam. And so that's like a whole other issue, but it looks like, you know, like we can kind of get into that a little bit later, like how does that manifest within like our local communities, and how are people's identities kind of subjugated under a kind of regime that makes Islam ahistorical, but also pushes one type of narrative that ignores the context that people come from. So when we think about like the MSAs, we have this great opportunity, especially in a place like UCLA, which has so much diversity. Like I'm looking at the room, and like there's people from all over the place, people of all different shades, and this is just really amazing. And it's important that we begin to have this conversation, that we start to think about how do we relate to each other, and then how does our identities, our intersecting identities, interact with structures of power. So right now you are in an institution of higher education. Now the education as a system actually has many great opportunities, right? So this is part of this myth that, you know, anybody can make it. So you're here, you're successful, you get straight A's, you graduate, you're gonna do amazing. But we have certain realities of racism within this institution, which actually disadvantages students of certain backgrounds. So particularly African American and Latino students, students who may not have the same types of resources. So I'm not going to make any assumptions about where people's backgrounds are or their family levels of support. But not everybody has the same level of support to get through this system to prove like, hey, I can get a job. But what makes things even worse and kind of very frustrating for many African Americans is like, even if you have your degree from UCLA or Stanford in my case, you can still end up underemployed, underpaid, and pretty much earn the same amount as a white American who just has a high school diploma. So those are realities that Black students face, whether they're Muslim or not. And so when we think about how do we support both like our students in the MSA who are African American, who may have different circumstances, who may not have the same types of advantages, to make sure that they are successful, to create open doors. And the promising thing is that I see that on this campus is that there's a lot of outreach work. So there's work within the dealing with incarcerated youth, because obviously like if you start out, some people have strikes against them even before they become 18. And so reaching out to young people who may have difficult paths in life, who made mistakes. And many of us made mistakes, but we got away with it, it's fine, but other kids, like they do something small and that's it. Like they have a felony. Some people have served, like they get felonies for graffiti in some states. I have to check California, but California's become much more liberal, or much more progressive in looking at criminal justice reform. And thanks much to the Muslim community in Southern California passing Prop 47. So there's like that example of what Muslims can do to actually deal with some of these disparities. Now, the other examples that we see where there may be some tensions within our MSAs are within the leadership. Now, some students may the leadership, anybody could be a leader. But there may be certain barriers to people feeling like, hey, do I really belong in this community? Now, when we did our hashtag conversation, it actually started from discussions that I had with people who organized events, because they were actually called at Columbia University. So, where they were saying look, we have tension because the Black students, the Black Muslim students feel like their MSA is not supporting Black on campus. Now, is anybody are there any issues that are going on campus with Black on campus? I know UCLA had a protest. They did the sit-in. Claremont, they had the one she did the hunger strike one day. President was gone. So,
No, we had a walkout here on campus with the ASU African Student Union.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some people in MSA that came out to support, but I felt like maybe it was just from what I saw. I felt for the most part it was either Muslims that identified as Black, or maybe some board members are board members. Other than that, I didn't see the people from the community, or even if it was brought up, it wasn't dismissed, but it was just oh, okay, that happened.
Yeah, and that feeling and that observation. So this summer in Chicago, we were involved in a march, Black Lives Matter march. So we had members that went. I wasn't in Chicago, but I was able to live tweet. My members were sending me live tweets, and some of them had mentioned if this was a Palestine rally, we would have had tons, a dozen buses packed. But they mentioned they had 6 buses. The buses weren't all packed, but they got a good number. But everybody noticed the Muslims that were there, and they were very happy. They really worked hard in Chicago to try to get the Muslims involved, because in Chicago, the people that worked in Guantanamo were trained in Chicago. So you have people in this country torturing, learning to torture, taking that to Guantanamo, and then torturing Muslims to get information. So it's just where they actually they're paying reparations for people who were locked away and tortured in prison. So this issue in Chicago was a big thing, but there were some misogynist that were nah, and a lot of MSAs, some students, maybe you have this too, because your parents care and they're just don't go to that protest, don't you get arrested. So it's just like there's sometimes that lack of solidarity and tension. But how are we like when it comes to like Students for Justice for Palestine? No shade, because we stand in solidarity. But like, do we have like is there more co-sponsorship or connections with the issue of Palestine? Yeah, like we feel like it's like it's a Muslim issue, or is it? Like,
I don't know. I kind of feel like SJP, I feel bad for SJP because SJP is kind of on its own, kind of.
it's kind of.
I mean, they share an office with the MSA. Like, we know what's going on.
They do, but we kind of like.
No, it's true. I think that's true. The thing is, I feel like the mentality. It's like, when there's Palestine stuff, it's like if Muslim people aren't there, it would be an issue. You'd be like, what? We're having the Palestine thing and no Muslims showed up. I'm not saying we always show up, but if they didn't, people would be like, oh, the Muslims didn't show up. But like if there's a black protest on campus, people would be like, what? The Muslims didn't show up?
Yeah.
Nobody would say,
I
you get what I'm saying?
So there's nuance. I know like now like there's a lot of there's a lot of pressure, and we're kind of going through this time where students may be like, I got finals, I gotta like pass. I can't afford to like do this nonviolent resistance and get arrested. But like there's peaceful protests or things that you could do to show solidarity and not risk your midterms. But generally, like when we talk about like fundraisers or things like that, there's some issues that get a lot more play, a lot more airtime, and then other issues that don't. So, and this can happen in your local community, but it can also happen on campus. Like we can pass on like, okay, we're gonna do like a Syria fundraiser, but like an issue like for Rohingya or an issue maybe for Central African Republic may less likely talked about. And in fact, I see like kind of blank stares. Central African Republic? What's that? There's a genocide going on, right? In Central. Does everybody know that? Okay.
I heard something about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like they pretty much are burning all mosques and, slaughtering most Muslims in Central African Republic. Yeah, so it's, so certain issues kind of get seen as like, okay, well, those are kind of ASU things, African Student Union, those are Black Student Union, and these things are Muslim issues because only Muslims care. Now, our job really is to kind of work on, when we want people to care about our issues, we have to show the same type of empathy regardless. So people's hearts and seeing the images coming out of Syria for, undocumented people, the image of the trucks, there was one in Europe where they were smuggling people and they died on the trucks. Well, this happened in Central America also. But yet for Muslims, when we think about what is our obligation to orphans? What is our obligation to orphans?
Take care of them.
We're supposed to take care of orphans. But what's happening right now on our border? Children are getting locked up and sent back. Children that if they go back to Central America, they're fleeing violence. And so yet Muslims aren't going to be like, okay, are we going to be in solidarity with the Latino community that's working to be advocates for them? Even though we can take a major role to support their efforts. Mm-hmm.
Also, don't we have kind of a weird relationship with adoption in general as a community? Like, if we're supposed to be taking care of orphans, why aren't we adopting more children?
Oh yeah, that's, so adoption, that's another thing. Even though there's some families, there are some stories of where there's some families that are just I will adopt a Syrian child. And then, then the same families will shun one of their family friends who adopted an African child because somehow, it's different. So, mm-hmm. Yeah. So our lobby effort. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not on our radar. And then when we think about how do we build solidarity? Now, if we actually started to look at the closed borders, if we actually started to look at Islamophobia as a systemic issue, that would open us up to think about how we can really truly be allies for other marginalized communities. Now, I just wanted to kind of emphasize with Islamophobia, it's not a phobia. It's not just because people see the scarf and like, oh my gosh, I'm allergic to that. It's not just an irrational fear, you know, but it's a term that actually was developed by the industry itself. But like, it really is a systemic form of rational fear that's actually fomented by the media, by negative images, by laws put in place. And many of us know certain laws, like whether it's like increased surveillance of Muslims, legislation to make it more difficult. Many people, some families I know, like where it's very difficult for their families to get visas now because they come from Muslim majority countries. And so families are actually broken up and torn up because of that. You know, family members can't visit each other. So there's a lot, there's embedded within our legal structures are forms of discrimination against Muslims. And then we have a whole media that plays into that. And then now we have a presidential candidate that's like building a platform off of his hatred against Muslims and Mexicans, so Latinos, and who is not like everybody, yeah, every non-white person. So it's just like, so we can even see the kind of connection. Typical people that are like Islamophobic don't like the same types of people. So they tend to be anti-Black, they tend to be anti-Latino, they tend to be anti-Muslim, anti-like women's rights, like especially reproductive rights. There's this whole agenda kind of like to kind of control marginalized groups. Now, when we as Muslims start to look at and understand that our engagement with Islamophobia needs to be from a critical angle. And by critical, it means that we can't really try to be, to prove ourselves to be nice, okay? Like if all the, like if Pam Geller like got to know us, she just know we're just nice people. There's no way, like you can invite her to tea as many times as you want, but she's making money off of this. Some people are profiting from this industry. Other people, they may profit whatever psychological benefit of like hatred or looking down upon brown people, Muslim people like us. So there's people that are very invested, whether psychologically or financially, in the system of oppression that many of us experience in this country. So, I mean, that's like the one thing I just really want to emphasize, that Islamophobia isn't just going to be solved by like proving ourselves to be good citizens and then hoping that like ISIS all goes away. Because we know like ISIS doesn't go away and ISIS doesn't speak for everybody. And what's happening in Iraq is like a much deeper issue, like, but the critique that Muslims experience really silences critiques of US imperialism and militarism in the region that's causing something like ISIS to rise up, okay? So we have to kind of understand the kind of ways that like Islamophobia operates to control people of color, people from non-European, like in Muslim majority regions, in a way that prevents a kind of critique about, and this is the word that a lot of like Muslim, like the uncles and aunties and elders don't like, white supremacy, okay? So like, what is white supremacy? Eurocentrism, anybody? I mean, this is UCLA, so.
Eurocentrism is when you focus on Europe as the ideal, and white supremacy is the idea that white people are above all others. Their culture is perfect, their everything is perfect, and when it's like, no, it's not.
Yeah. So there's some tensions also within the ways that like Muslim organizations have tried to deal with white supremacy, or just in that basically Islamophobia is tied to this white supremacy. Do you have a?
Yeah, I just have a comment. There's actually a statistic that shows that most of the people in the US that have opposed Islam and have this Islamophobic idea are usually the ones that are less educated about the ideals of Islam and Islam as a whole. And further studies actually go to show that these people are the ones who rely highly, or more highly than others, on media sources, their source of information about Islam. And so it just goes to show that we should have more representation of Muslims in the media in order to kind of get the truth out there. So these misconceptions are kind of really not
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I noticed about white supremacy, I think it's so much that Europe and her offspring are better, is that their history is all that compromised, so that the natural sort of way of doing anything outside of that has to be explained by some sort of so it's like that way of being is more, like, you're not that, you're
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on a discourse level, but like what we could see here, and this is where we could talk about the dominant narrative. So the dominant narrative is like obviously like European and like kind of Eurocentric values are like the norm, but we also have real world policies. So like for those that don't fit that norm, there may be like certain kind of policies of like how they're going to do diplomacy or lack of diplomacy, military aggression, or discriminate against certain groups. And those policies have real world consequences. And those real world consequences can lead to people losing economically being hurt, or they can result in death. As in the case of like this, if you look on the worksheet, the dominant narrative that Black men are violent, we have like certain policies that may come into place, like we're profiling, and then the real world consequences can lead to death. You know, some of the dominant narratives that we have on a subconscious level can even affect the ways that people respond to other people and can have real world consequences. Now, what I want to do is to kind of go over here, and I'm going to be off of the camera, but I want to kind of go into like, look at what your thoughts were. And through the night, I'm going to kind of go in here, places where you've seen racism. So we have the framing of Assata Shakur. My school. Some people say their parents, they don't mean to, but they're uneducated about issues at hand. Hey, you know, they happen. You know, even some of the best of us, they have some missteps and say stuff. Social media, getting turned down for a job because I'm Muslim. The police, different social circles, student government classes, media news. So these are things like, I mean, most Muslims here have felt some sense of discrimination or misrepresentation in the media. In the Muslim community, when friends rejected good potential spouses. So here we have this kind of interpersonal racism. So we have like some institutional, so we have dinner parties, so these Arab azimas. Also, the Desi community, the family would always tell me not to go out in the sun because the arms would get dark and my face would get tanner or browner. So it's just like, even like, you see how this stuff permeates just like our whole kind of being. Like you just like, you wake up and it's like, there's racism. In an apartment, in a home, in a family, in the masjid, in the supermarkets, in the masjid, at the airport, international student. Yeah, so students are like, even the students making fun of how other groups look. The grocery store, you can't even go food shopping. God. You know, you wake up and you go to like a family dinner. Like I would feel that too. Like some know me, Muslim in my family, and I just hear like nonsense about Muslims. I'm like, that's not true. So, you know, like this stuff is permeating both institutional but in our lives. And uprooting this stuff takes a lot of work. It takes so much work. So like doing this one talk isn't going to like that negative programming, whether it's like dark or light skin, or if we're getting programmed by the TV shows that we watch, the news that we see, to be like, you know what, like this stuff is all nonsense. Like, how do I uproot this? It's one, by understanding that this stuff actually affects you on a subconscious level and how we treat each other. And once you can kind of recognize that, you can start to work on subverting it, to uprooting it, to undermining it, and to replace that with some healthier ways that we see ourselves and each other. Because in much of this, we have issues of racism that's both institutional, but we also have the interpersonal. But the most difficult form of racism for us will be the internalized racism. Okay, how we internalize these messages about ourselves, about others. How are we doing on time? So we have like 8:30. So I like a half hour with you. Now, what I want you to do is on your green sheet is try to imagine, to think about, what did I write here? I had a concise question. So what does a community committed to racial justice look like? So what would the community look like that can tackle all of this? We have institutional, interpersonal, internalized.
The best way to tackle this is kind of unify all these different bodies that kind of face those problems. And instead of using that as a factor, like culture and race and whatnot, kind of tackling them together in order to have a more efficient system. And utilize all the different resources and all the different perspectives that are available at the table, and kind of put those minds together to tackle these bigger issues, because in that way we're the majority rather than the minority. And just even that wording minority, like if you put them all together, we are like the major groups, and just being placed in these like different categories, we're kind of seen as smaller, but once we rise up together.
Yeah, I mean, it would just really behoove us as a community, as a faith community, to unite amongst ourselves, right? Like it's very hard, it's disingenuous. Like they're like, oh, we're gonna allow Black Lives Matter, but yet we don't Black Lives here. Or we're gonna like do Latino rights, but yet we're not sharing the Latino Muslim voices. So, like working within ourselves as a community, but then also building interfaith, like multiracial coalitions. So I want you to kind of think about like what would the world look like? Maybe what would something need to change? So here's like kind of positive thoughts. So I want you to kind of think and kind of dream, what does a community committed to racial justice look like? And write it on your green sheet, and then I'll come back to that in just a moment. So you can take a couple minutes. So you have yours done? Yeah, you want to put yours there? Somebody collect there.
Like your parents. I have a thought for this. Let's punch some racists. It was time for you.
Okay, so I'll give you like 2 more minutes because then we're gonna go into the next. It's not hard to imagine some positives. It's easy to talk about problems, right? You have multiracial, yeah. It'd be like smash burger. It'd be like Desi Mexican burgers together. Yeah. Antarctic, yeah. Oh, there's like a soda here. I don't know if you wanna. Okay, does everybody have their answers?
Sticky notes. I came in.
Oh yeah.
Do you have extra pencils? Okay, no, but I can like. A pencil? Do you take yours off? Oh, yes.
Like heaven, yeah. Like the world that can be like. I don't think I did my I'll turn away and then I'll like try to summarize.
Let me mix it up. There you go.
Is yours It's like one of my pins is like they run out. Okay, thank you. Oh, okay. Oh, you're reading that? Oh, yeah.
He was asking why did I move? I was like, I gotta move the question.
Yeah. And this is like a good sign when people are talking. It's like sometimes we have people looking bored or this is a bad sign. I know, sorry live stream people. It's always, I mean, I'm not like the most articulate. I'm kind of like in that teacher mode right now.
You can look now.
I'm gonna take a picture of these. I mean, these are great. Okay. So it looks like most people got their list up.
Hey, let's settle down, y'all.
So what I loved about this list here, I mean, you can kind of, we have some like concrete thinkers here, you know, like they have definitely some ideas, and there's a combination of kind of like structures that would be in place, but also like how people would connect to each other. So here we have like, so somebody says we need a revolution or something, like civil rights movement. Yeah, we do. We do. We need to like somehow really think about how do we get at really what is our end goal in anti-racism? Is eliminating these structures that dehumanize us, that prevents us from really connecting with each other. Okay, a community committed to racial justice is unified. Okay, so we have greater resources and perspectives to be put together to fight it. Education and humility. So here we have both like a way of learning and also a way of being. So I love that, the kind of embodiment of anti-racism, of like racial justice. Humility. Because the opposite is kibber, is like the idea of being arrogant, of thinking that you're superior, whether you're up on that totem pole or not. More community organizing, more community involvement. So a community committed to racial justice means that people have to be involved. You can't be passively anti-racist. It's also important to remember that this is not just a matter of not being racist, because the minute like most people will say like they're not racist. In fact, on social media, say I'm not racist, but what do they do?
Say something racist.
Say the most racist thing. So it's just like, but to be anti-racist is to be committed to uprooting racist structures, racist behaviors, and patterns of behavior. So it's this committed effort to doing something about it. Now, it doesn't mean like every day you gotta like strive and be like just pushing up like a rock. But it's like you have this lifetime committed to learning and uprooting. Okay, so no Donald Trump. Yeah.
Okay, let's go.
Well, one day, you know, we're all, you know, have our moments. So one day, you know, maybe he'll learn from his ways, or but we wouldn't have like some type of like the type of fascism that we're seeing going on in the world, going on in our society. This would be a community that pays attention to a person's qualities as a Muslim, their commitment to Allah rather than their skin color, race, or ethnicity in the eyes of Allah. So that's like very beautiful, this idea that we will look at people's character. And in fact, you know, it's very sad when you see some of the most pious people, but yet they become very superficial when it comes to like who's who in their community, who they interact with, especially like, you know, when they start to think about like marriage. I've had like friends who return like, and these are women who return because they're attorneys. You know, like, oh.
Because they're attorneys.
They're attorneys.
What? Wow.
Sheesh.
Hey, son of
No,
a-
hate on it. Yes, attorneys. Yes, they're attorneys. Interracial couple. I mean, but can you guys be like pious, you know, you're like so cool and stuff. You know, like, like very superficial. Some people understood the world that could be is heaven, this idea that Jannah, so the ideal world that we have, like where this stuff doesn't matter, is Jannah. That's the ideal that we're kind of striving for. So we may know, like, hey, we're not going to get there, but we're going to get to the promised land. We're going to get to the promised land. No language barriers. I like this in some ways. It's like, it's the idea of us learning languages. I know I've been like really poor at learning Urdu, like, you know, some of the other languages, like I have a friend, she's Bangladeshi, I'm like, I should learn some words so I can say something nice to her mom. You know, so like there's the kind of idea that we care as much about each other's language and we're gonna take that time, so that's nice. Everyone equal opportunities for people of color. Oh, we can shut down our racist elders. You know, what is that with like older people? And I'm getting older too, I'm not young. So like the older you get, the grumpier you get. And you kind of say some off stuff. Like my grandmother's 80 and she does not care what she says. So she says some like really like, I'm like, Grandma, I have no idea where you got that from. But yeah, accepts others for LGBT rights, immigrant rights and workers' rights. So this idea of like coalition building across these marginalized groups. People are not turned down for marriage based on insignificant issues like race. Yeah, people are turning down lovers, you know, like they're just like, I'm just really gonna stereotype. Organizations and communities with leaders from every minority working together with equal representation. So here's like tangible. So I love we have this like mixture of tangible things that could be done on a structural level to address this commitment to racial justice. And then there's these ideals and these like kind of personal characteristics that we could embody. And so this is great. And I want you to kind of continue to think about what does commitment to racial justice look like? Now, some people may say like, okay, why do we have to focus on racial justice of all things? Well, in this society, racial justice is like very significant. This is a country where we've had like 600,000 people die, like kill each other in a war. Okay, over race, over the right to own my ancestors. So, you know, like the idea of racial justice is important to address the major disparities that we have in this society, where you have things that are tangible across that are salient across class lines. Some people be like, oh, we're going to use a Marxist analysis. No hate on the Marxists, you know, like the Marxist historians or scholars or structuralists. But, you know, some people are like, well, what about class? Well, you know, in many ways, this society has given people a certain caste structure based on race. So based on race, your treatment will be less than regardless of where you fit on a class line. Also, that some people may actually be upholders of white supremacy and still be people of color. So it's important also not to remember that just because we have a Black president, obviously, Black people are dying, we have people being poisoned in Flint, and those decisions that were made, like the callous disregard for people in Flint, had a lot to do with 60% of the population was African American. So when we think about issues that are affecting us in this society, race is a huge thing. And then also when we think about globally, we also have to think about how our people of color, how our non-Europeans are treated. So even in ordering our global society, it's significant. And it's a way that we can address many issues. So when we're dealing with racial justice, it's not just saying, oh, hey, we're only here to humanize non-European people. We're also here to uplift all people, because many people, even though they may be white European Americans, may be invested in white supremacy, but it also serves against their best interests wholeheartedly. But they may be invested in the issue of white supremacy, just like during slavery times, because they're like, one day I'll get to the mountaintop and own myself a plantation, and at least, or if they were like, I may not have anything, but at least I'm not Black, So that's something that when we can kind of uproot some of these structures, we can work on uplifting everybody, and we can work on some of the crucial issues in this society. It doesn't mean that everything that we do is just about race, but racial justice allows us to touch upon deep issues, and especially for us as Muslim Americans, when we work on racial justice, we connect our struggle with the liberation struggles that have been going on in the Americas for hundreds of years, okay? So we can avoid the kind of Muslim exceptionalism that just says, oh, they hate me just because I'm Muslim. But if they understood us being Muslim, they wouldn't treat us like the indigenous people whose land we occupy, so we have to understand that this society is built on the oppression of the indigenous people here. They're still here, and there's also indigenous Muslims. So it's we should also connect with our Native American brothers and sisters. Obviously, as Muslim Americans, we have the formerly enslaved population, and so much of this country is built off the labor, unpaid labor, stolen land, and we can understand that. Then we can work on coalition building to address those disparities that still harm people. There are the Navajo, their water was poisoned. For a couple of years, they've been fighting against that. It was a lot of silence about it, but now it's happening in Flint. And Flint is kind of near a Muslim enclave, so Muslims are caring. But I would love to see Muslims be concerned about what's happening with our indigenous brothers and sisters, both here in the United States, Canada, Central America, and that we can begin to care about people regardless of whether they're Muslim or not, because it is our obligation to stand for justice, even if it's against ourselves. And many of us were still benefiting in the settler colony, and that's kind of difficult term, because many times as Muslim Americans, we've taken this kind of model minority narrative to look, we fit in, we're doctors, we're this and we're that, and we have this great immigrant story, and America is a land of immigrants, and we're greater socioeconomically, and we're well integrated. And that's a nice story, but it erases many of the struggles. Many Muslim Americans are indigent, they're struggling, okay? We have undocumented people. We have people here, probably, in Los Angeles, who are struggling with homelessness, okay? And as a community, when we can acknowledge that members of our community are affected by systemic oppression, and that we are part of that legacy of people fighting for that dignity despite these dehumanizing systems. And I think that's where we have to stand. We can't just, in order to fit in, just be quiet and say oh, let's not make waves. And many of our parents, my mom was, my mom was why don't I just get a regular job, and just make some money. But I understand that, but when we start to focus on racial justice, then we can work to uplift ourselves in a dignified way. We can uplift other people and fulfill our obligation as believers. Now, I know we have a few minutes, so instead of lecturing, because I can do a lot of talking, anybody from my household would tell you, I want you to, maybe we can kind of form groups. You know, I'll just let you kind of cluster organically. So I want you to look at the systemic oppression of most Americans, and then kind of work as a group to look at other minority groups. So if you can work together and fill out the dominant narrative, policies, and real-world consequences. So I want you to think about these systemic issues. You have lots of definitions, lots to work with, but I want you to kind of like, can we get like a group here? Yeah. And